Hey, welcome into the Husker 24/7 podcast. I'm Mike Schaefer, joined by Brian Christopherson. It's actually the Husker 24/7 HoopsCast, and I'm too lazy to start over this recording, so just go along with it. It's still Brian Christopherson, and I'm still Mike Schaefer, but we're going to be talking about basketball because they've just won 2 straight games against ranked opponents, bringing them up to 4 wins against ranked teams this year, reinvigorating their season. BC, are you back on the hey, this could still be a good year train? Did the last week sweep away the previous 6 games before it?
It didn't sweep away because we're built as humans to be like, man, if they only had that Iowa game, or like we
Yeah.
still got to do that. So that's part of it. But I have better posture as I am not slouched anymore watching the games. I feel like it's out there for them. And this last week certainly, I think pulled people back in after. Some people are about ready to wave the white flag if they hadn't. But as I wrote the other day in the game story, we can pretend nobody did that. We can just act like everybody was along this journey all along and believe that they're going to get it together. So we're not going to point anybody out.
So you raised a really interesting question that we should ask friend of the podcast, Todd Peterson. Does Nebraska's athletics contribute to like stooped looks because of all the hunched in shoulders and the bad posture that comes from years of losing? Do you think that he's in the Chicagoland area, so I'm sure he sees it with Bears fans, of course. But I wonder if there's a correlation there.
Yeah, I never thought about that. Like Nebraskans now, as they get to 65 or older, might have like worse back situations, I think, than maybe previous generations because of some struggles in Husker sports. So Todd Peterson might be onto something. I just hope that 6'4" Todd Peterson hasn't lost an inch or anything with his posture since his playing days and since he drove Dabo Sweeney and Pete Carroll nuts scoring touchdowns on him.
Probably ruined their posture too. So that's
Exactly.
maybe that's where his interest in being a chiropractor started. Right there was just the stooped shoulders of a Dabo Sweeney. Perhaps that's what it was. All right, enough about that. There should be no stooped shoulders. Everyone should be fired up. Nebraska basketball went on the road, beat Oregon, beat Illinois at home. Neither game pretty. Nebraska felt like they lost both games about 75 times, despite comfortably leading each game most of the way. They really only trailed briefly in the Illinois
46
game, right?
seconds. No, they didn't even trail in the Illinois game. They never trailed.
Tied.
They trailed for 46 seconds against Oregon, and it was when the opening dunk. The Ducks got a dunk right off the bat, and you're like, what are we watching? And you slouch down like that. I'm slouching for those who aren't watching. But then Nebraska was quickly ahead, 4-2 at the 18:15 mark. I wrote it down, and they never trailed again. But it was always kind of like in that like 6-10 range where you're like, you're a little nervous going into the last even 30 seconds.
Yeah, it's easy to see how that Oregon game is kind of how you can draw it up that it needs to work for Nebraska. You got to be able to get to the free throw line. You have to be able to finish around the rim when you have those opportunities. The one thing that needed to be added into that game, and I would argue there's probably more than one, but the one that stands out the most, you need Connor Essegian to be an outside shooter. He has to be able to help you out there. You have to get more contribution in your three-point shooting than I think they finished with five made in that game. And so you were fortunate in that Oregon could not shoot that much better, but Nebraska just really struggled to score from the outside. But the good news was every layup this program has missed in the last 2 years from inside of 4 feet, they were making in Eugene, Oregon. Something about those rims allowed Nebraska much better touch right around the rim themselves.
Yeah, they were only 4 of 23 from 3.
Yeah, so not even 5.
They were 3 of 20 until Gary hit that one from the corner, which felt huge. Like it was a 5-point game, and it was that tipping point, sort of like you felt in Iowa City, where Nebraska needed to get that swing basket to push it like, okay, it's going to be a tough hill for you guys to get over. And Gary hits that one. And then Raleigh Wooster, it wasn't a 3, but he hit a really tough 2 that was the shot clock was winding down. It wasn't like he shot it with 20 on the shot clock, but it was a difficult one where I'm sure people are like, no, 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 yes, and so those two shots in the last 5 minutes really stood out. But you're right, they did finish well. They made Oregon pay for their press at times too. Like they kind of, even though they had some turnover issues early, I think they gave up 11 points off turnovers in the first half. That ended up only 16-12 for the Ducks, that stat. And I think Nebraska's fine with that. Like that wasn't a bad deal in that category. And Nebraska sort of evened it out by getting layups and dunks by beating it a few times.
Yeah, the where it got scary, and we're jumping around here, but where it gets scary is the last 3 minutes of the first half, where Nebraska just gives back everything they had done at that point, with just some of the worst decision making that you could possibly imagine from guys that are expected to be smarter with the basketball. Like, there really was no excuse for what they were doing inside the final 3 minutes when Oregon went on their little run. And then the nice thing is Nebraska closed that half out by getting that I think it was a dunk from Bryce Williams right at the end of the half. And that was kind of important because at least it pushed it back up to then I think 6 points. You go into half with a 6-point lead, but you were up by as much as 15 with shooting free throws to go up 17 points in the first half against an Oregon team that might have went away if you keep it on them. And all of a sudden you're back in the middle of this game. And we see that too often with Nebraska. They are not a safe team with a big lead. You do not feel good. You feel good that Nebraska can lead anybody by 15 points. You don't feel good about their ability to close it out. And they gave it back in the first half, but came back, played strong right away in the second half, and finished it out at the free throw line, which I thought was a remarkably important thing too. They shot really nicely down the stretch with the free throw shooting. You mentioned Raleigh Wooster's big 2-point jumper that he had there. He also hit a bunch of free throws when he had the opportunity to, and it was, I think, maybe the best game from Raleigh Wooster in some time. And that's a guy that I think takes probably more flack than he should. And I think he's been pretty helpful for Nebraska. I thought some of the biggest things that came out of the game on Monday was we got Andrew Morgan and Raleigh Wooster playing as really important role players in critical ways. And I think that really showed out in that win.
Yep. And you're right about the end of the first half. I don't mind, especially in hoops, there's going to be like sometimes an 8-0 run on you. But when it bothers me is when you just hand a team like 4 to 6 points on a platter in that run. And that's sort of what happened there. It was that 11-0 run. I did think the last like 50 seconds or whatever of that half, as you mentioned, were critical because Oregon had like, I think 2 possessions where they were down 4, and it would have been a tough psychological hurdle to overcome if they had like even that or got within like 1, at the break. And so the fact that Nebraska scored last, and then Hoiberg went into the locker room and he told them, "You're winning against a ranked team on the road by 6. Let's go." Like, you can kind of reset then and be like, "We're in position. Yeah, it didn't finish that well, but it's going as planned. So let's go do it." And you're right. They punched back right away in the second half. And Oregon never looked really comfortable on offense.
No.
They were like in the 30s percentage wise for most of the game. I think they ended 40 because they actually hit a few tough shots like in the last minute and a half to kind of stretch the game out. But prior to that, they never found consistency on that end of the floor. And they were only 5 of 20 from 3. And we can say, okay, they missed some open shots. Illinois, who was 10 of 42 from 3, missed some open shots. That is true. But I do think there is a difference in those games where teams have been like that as opposed to the ones where they've lit them up, where Nebraska has just had that aggression and kind of forced looping passes and been able to rotate their defense and contest a lot better in those games they've won. And that's how I felt watching it Sunday. I always felt like Nebraska had a good grip on it defensively.
I have this weird feeling that Nebraska just plays better as a team when the other team has a notable post player that they kind of work into their offense. I mean, when you are Oregon and you want to get, it's Biddle, right? Or is it Biddle?
Biddle, Biddle.
You want to get him involved, and you're trying to get him the ball down. Like Nebraska, I think thrives in those scenarios. It's the teams that play them more, face up are the ones that I think Nebraska had the biggest issue with, or Iowa, where you have Freeman and they went away from him in the second half, and Freeman wasn't the issue in the Iowa game. So it is interesting to me that when Oregon decides that they wanted to try to play through Biddle, it plays right into what I think Nebraska is best at defensively. And that'll be something to kind of watch. Can they adjust that when they play teams that maybe don't have as good of a big down there? Can they still play good defense? Can they still get out on the ball if they're not having this big guy that allows the offense? I think it slows down a little bit. It's easier to guard against some of those passes when they're coming into the post and then back out of the post. It lets you reset a little quicker. I don't think that's always the case for some of the teams that aren't doing that.
It was just nice to see Nebraska, in a more big picture talk here, step on a team while they're down. Like, I feel like too often Husker Athletics has, on the men's side more so, has let programs off the hook when they're in a losing skid. And so I've sort of got in that mindset, like even going into Sunday, I thought it was a good quad one opportunity before tip off, but I also was like, Oregon lost by 26 to UCLA. They've sour taste. They're going to come out with and punch hard. And I sort of expect teams when they're on a skid to bounce back against Nebraska. So I like the fact that narrative that's in my head, at least, for this game was put to bed, and you're the one forcing the other side to like have player only meetings now, which I think was going on and stuff like that. So it's nice to see that shoe on the other foot.
Can I say something that probably isn't going to be that well received, or people are just going to be like, "Oh yeah, it's easy to say because they won."
Go for it.
I don't think there's a real difference between Nebraska and Oregon. Like, you beat a ranked team, but I don't think that Oregon team's that good. If you look at their schedule, they've won a bunch of close games against average Big Ten teams. Nebraska's lost a bunch of close games to average or bad Big Ten teams. But they've done a better job in crunch time, and they're maybe a slightly better team. But watching them play, it was not as much of an upset as it seems based off of one of the teams having a ranked number next to them.
No, they could play 10 times out there. I'm not saying Nebraska would have won 5, but maybe. Like,
I think it might have like 4.5. Would that be the line that you would set, sort of?
Yeah. So out there,
I don't think there's a lot that separates these two teams.
If you made them come to Lincoln and you put that number, you would put it like 6.5 or something for Nebraska. So
even in a neutral site, like, that's a team we start to think about Nebraska playing in the Big Ten tournament again, because this is now back on the table, having won these 2 games. Like, that's a team I wouldn't worry if they were on your side of the draw if you were playing. And that's not to say that Nebraska's beating them every time, but I just think it's a matchup that works well for them. And I didn't think they were that great. Watching UCLA dismantle them probably really kind of made me think that. But I think they're a fine Big Ten team. I think that's the story of the season, Brian, is that there are no off nights. And if you can just be slightly above average to just shading towards good, you're going to come out with a bunch of hard-fought wins, but could also get blown out when it doesn't look your way. And I think that's what we've kind of seen with this Nebraska team.
You know what the good news is? I think you're right in that analysis. The only thing that matters is the metrics, and they won early on against Alabama and A&M, and we're playing much better like earlier in the season. Although they did have I remember they had a game against somebody who was like a no-name and they had to pull it out of their butt, but they have a couple big wins that are going to, especially since it was in Eugene, it's going to keep this as a quad 1 game unless they just completely fall off the cliff the rest of the way.
I don't think they will. I just think they're another 8 to 10 win team in conference, and that's where I think Nebraska is too. That's why I think they're comparable.
They were the perfect team for Nebraska to play at this moment to try to give yourself a jolt, like you're back in it. And like, it was a game where it's going to count really well for you. Move Nebraska up 5 spots immediately that night from 55 to 50 in the net. Oregon came in 33, I think. And it was also, I bet, a game on Sunday afternoon where going in, Nebraska's like, we can beat these guys, looking at the tape on them. So I thought Nebraska played with that confidence from the start, like you're not above us, which they weren't. And that was just good to see. It was good to see the Huskers. Last year they were 0-7 on the road before they won one in the league, and this year was 0-5. But if they could go get Washington on Wednesday now, 2-5, and suddenly Hoiberg talks about plus and minus, like in the league, like you get a +1 if you win on the road, you get a -1 if you lose at home. It'd be even if they beat Washington Wednesday. Now they've lost 2 at home. They have a chance to get those right back, all on one West Coast trip.
Yeah, this is a big 2-game stretch right here for a variety of reasons, because if you come out of it as +2, I guess, which would be the 2 wins here. If you come out of this at +2, you're 6-7. You're right in the middle of the conversation. You've reset your entire season. And then what's left for you in your schedule, and it's not easy. And I do think that kind of gets tossed around like, oh, the schedule lightens up. It does.
Yeah.
But it's also you got Maryland coming to town. That's a team that's playing well on the road and giving everybody fits. And Nebraska played in a tough fight and maybe could have stole that game out there, but didn't. You've got Michigan. That's going to be a tough game here in Lincoln, I believe, as well. You have Minnesota coming up on the 1st, and they're battling. Like every team in this league is battling right now. Northwestern's battling. Iowa's battling. But Nebraska's healthy. And they have a good identity of who they are. And if they can continue to play the version of themselves that played against Illinois and Oregon and potentially knock down a couple more shots from the outside, they're a dangerous team. They've got veterans. Bryce Williams, whatever happened in overtime, and we aren't even talking about the Illinois game because the Oregon one's the most recent. Whatever happened in overtime in a game that never should have went to overtime, Bryce Williams wakes up and became the dominant force you wanted him to be, took over that overtime, wins the overtime, fantastic against Oregon. I'm excited to see what we're talking about next week with Bryce Williams, because if he has a great 2-game set here against Washington and Ohio State, we could talk about how that guy kind of turned his whole season and potentially Nebraska's season around in that overtime against Illinois.
Yeah, it just felt like he was a little passive for a few weeks after the Hawaii trip. And then
100%.
Even against Illinois, though, he was 10 of 26. And so, like, he had a kind of a rough last 5 minutes of regulation, actually, where he missed a couple of free throws. And he missed that bunny at the hoop. I understand why he missed it, because it was one of those plays where he like kind of stopped and it was like a little 3-footer that was kind of not your usual layup type. But nonetheless, he had a tough finish. And for him to shake that off and finish how he did, it was a potential flip point in the season. That, and they lead the whole way in that game. And then all of a sudden, Illinois has the ball with a chance to win it. And you're like, here we go. You're thinking someone's going to hit a dagger. And Nebraska's had some of it's been their own fault, but they've had some bad breaks in that skid. And finally, they played good defense in that last 20-second sequence against Illinois where they foul and they kind of take the clock down. And they
still almost made it, though.
Yeah, contested the shot really well, and it's like in and out. And when it popped out, I mean, maybe that's the play, like you finally got one where it's like, okay, it's coming our way now, and kind of own the overtime, especially defensively. And Raleigh hit a big shot in OT in that one too, like a mid-range shot. So you do have to give Worcester some credit for this 2-game winning streak.
Absolutely.
About the schedule, real quick. I mean, I agree with you. People need to not act like, oh, they could go 6-3. Yes, but let's not.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But
don't bank on it.
A couple things that are interesting, and I'm not saying this with glee. It's just, it could help Nebraska though. Barnheiser's out for the season for Northwestern. He's a tough player in this league. Owen Freeman is out for the season now at Iowa, who comes to Nebraska the final Sunday. And so you talked about health. That's going to matter down the stretch, and Nebraska has it right now. A couple teams on the schedule don't. That's getting ahead of things. So first off, you got to finish business Wednesday. I liked it going in too, that there was this West Coast trip, sort of like the NBA to Hoiberg, where it's like, go out there as a team on a mission, let's get 2 wins. You sort of set your mind to that before you even get on the plane. And they did that well in Hawaii too. I think they went out there and like, we're not coming back with a loss attached to us. And maybe that's going to be at play here. So that experience could help them.
Plus, they get to hang out by the Pacific Ocean. It's probably majestically pretty over there. So much better than the dreariness that is February in Nebraska. Let's play our version of a game show, the Guess a Random Husker Hooper. I have one picked out for BC. I don't think we've used this player. I will give you this clue right off the bat. He started 60 games in his career, drew 1 start as a sophomore, and started 59 games between his junior and senior year. I'll throw in one extra thing just to give you the time period. Yeah. He played when Nebraska was in the Big 8. He played when Nebraska was in the Big 12.
Okay. Man, 98. Okay. So we're talking.
I can give you way more clues if you want. You just have to let me know.
You know what this game should be called? First off, it should be called the Embarrass BC game, or it reminds me of the Seinfeld. As you know, I like to go into Seinfeld where it's like, why don't you just tell me the name of the movie? Like that's like how it always goes for me. Like I don't. This should be kind of up my alley. 98, 9. So we're talking. He was in the Big 12, so that was.
He was in the Big 8 and the Big 12.
So we're talking like 96, 97.
Oh, he would have played in those years, yeah. He specifically played 96, 97, but he also played 95, 96, and 97, 98.
And he started how many games?
He started 59 games. Here's a clue for you. Started 60 games. He never started a game when Nebraska was in the Big 8. So that should help you at least kind of determine a little bit.
I need
would you like a position? Would you like points averages? Would you like a hometown?
Give me like a height. Yeah, like a position and height.
Okay. Yeah. Played listed as a forward, 6'8". Here's another clue for you.
Was it?
Go ahead.
So Vincent Hamilton.
It is not Vincent Hamilton.
That's that era, though, right?
It is that era. He was teammates with Vincent Hamilton. He would have played on Nebraska's tournament team that lost to Arkansas.
It was like.
I'm sure he started that game.
Was he a local kid?
He's local now.
Is Andy Markowski?
Andy Markowski. Congratulations. You got it correct.
Where's Andy Markowski from?
I believe he's from Ohio, is what I have in my head, but I could be thinking of someone else.
Let me see.
I didn't think he was originally from Nebraska.
I'm looking it up. You know who?
No, he's an in-state player. I got that one wrong. See, I ruined it for you.
Where at? Was he Lincoln?
He's from Ord.
Okay.
Ord.
You know who was around that team?
Apologies to the community of Ord.
I knew he wasn't on this. He wasn't this big, and I knew he didn't finish his career here. Alvin Mitchell was on one of those teams, and Alvin Mitchell played at Omaha Burke when I was a kid, and we would go watch Burke play a lot. And that kid, he's the perfect example. Alvin Mitchell showed you how hard it is to go from being a high school superstar, and I'm not dissing on him, but to go from that to being like a dude at the next level, or even like a starting 5 regular, like, because he was unbelievable as a high school player. And I always remember him as an example of like how big the jump is for guys. Like I saw him go up and do alley-oop dunks and hit buzzer beaters at Burke and all this stuff. And it's just another level going to going to college, and so I always even respect the guys who can make that jump. So Markowski, he started 60 games.
60 games, yeah. So he had 568 rebounds in his career, which is just outside of the top 10. He was a captain for each of his last 2 seasons and was second on the team in rebounding each of the last 2 seasons. I'm assuming Hamilton was first. Was a 3-time academic All Big 12 selection.
I'm looking at the 96-97 roster, which he was a sophomore on. That had Lou, obviously, but Larry Florence was an interesting player. Obviously Vincent. Bernard Garner. Did you know much about him? He could back guys down. He could do that back down game and just get himself
I played a round of golf with Bernard Garner way back when. There was like a Nebraska basketball charity event, and they needed some media people to fill out the thing. So Lee B and I were playing golf with Bernard Garner, Eric Strickland, and somebody else. It was a good time.
Okay. Yeah, he was a guy that I remember fondly. Yeah, those weren't bad. That wasn't a bad roster they had back then.
Yeah, no, it was a tournament team. I mean, they finished 4th in the Big 12 and lost to Arkansas in a close one. Had the opportunity to get off the schneid at that time.
Yeah,
we talked about this on the last podcast.
Yeah, we don't have to go through it again, but yeah. So good. I'm usually that's way more ugly for me, that game. So
it's pretty ugly for me that I said he was from out of state. I thought he was from Ohio for some reason. Who am I?
Oh, Ord. He's from Ord.
Starts with an O. I guess I got that going for me.
I have the book Winesburg, Ohio.
I didn't want to have to get down to the clue. I didn't want to get to the clue that he occasionally has done radio with Kent Pavelka, or that his daughter plays for the current Nebraska basketball.
I would have got it. I would have got that right away.
That's good.
Although with this brain, you never know. I could stumble around. So I'm going to count that as a win for me. I'm going to have a pep in my step, just like Husker Hoops heading to Washington right now.
All right, we'll finish with this. 2-0, 1-1, 0-2. Put you on the spot right now.
For this week. So Super Bowl kickoff with the game that we're pretending. Were you one of those people, real quick, to it right away when the matchup was set, you're like, I'm not even going to watch the Super Bowl? That's kind of how I was for like 24 hours. I was being that guy, but I will watch it grudgingly.
I was always going to watch it because it's still, the NFL is still like my favorite thing to watch, and I watch random Thursday night games all the time. So why would I not watch the Super Bowl? But I'm not excited about the matchup. I don't particularly care who wins, but I'll be there and I'll be watching it. And it'll be Hudson's second Super Bowl. It's on his birthday this year. So
oh, nice.
Yeah. His mom's a Chiefs fan. She's excited, even though she doesn't. She used to watch like all of the games, and then now, because the Chiefs just get to the Super Bowl every year, she's kind of like tuned in the playoffs. Like, it's bad. I called her out on it, and she told me that someone had to take care of the household. So then I just got real quiet and left her alone because I need my Sundays to wallow in the Vikings losses.
She's like a Yankees fan in the early 2000s. It's just like, well, wake me up when the playoffs arrive. Okay, what's Nebraska's record by kickoff of the Super Bowl this week? They play Ohio State at home on Sunday at 1. And I will say, I want to say so bad 2-0 because, man, it's liftoff if that happens and things are really exciting. I'm going to play the safe route and say 1-1, where they win at home, lose on the road. And I hope I'm wrong.
I think 1-1 is the most likely result of this. I would love to also say 2-0. What I think actually happens, I think they'll win at Washington, and then they'll come home, and Ohio State has played teams tough. Like, they're just not easy wins. And so I think they beat Washington, and then they come home and they get back under, if you would, with the loss at home, and have to go find another road win to balance it out. But I'll say 1-1 for Nebraska this week as well.
All right. Hopefully
I think we're both really couching it a little bit because I just don't know that I believe that they can consistently play night in and night out how they did the last 2 games. And I just also don't know that teams are going to miss as many 3-pointers as they have in the last 2 games.
They need to start cashing in those. I know they're
So
not
many
a
open looks.
deep shooting
So many
team,
open looks.
but Esiason, that's what he's there for. And other guys had opportunities too in that second half where you felt like if they had hit 1 or 2 of those, it wouldn't have put the strain on it that it did. So yeah, like that, you're not going to win. They're not going to probably win Wednesday if they go 4 or 23, something like that. So that they've got to have Connor. I think he's the wild card. He's got to hit
He's got to
4
be able to
3.
get you 2 threes a game.
Yeah.
He's got to be able to get you an average of 2 threes a game. He didn't. Did he have 1 against Illinois?
He didn't. Against Illinois.
I know against Oregon he didn't make 1.
Yeah, he had 2 points at the very end against Oregon. He had 14 against Illinois. He was 2 of 6 from the 3.
Okay.
He did. Remember, he started well, and then in the second half, he had a couple that were kind of big, where you felt like, sort of like
they had the inbounds plays. They had some really nice inbounds against Illinois. We didn't talk about that game really at all, and they had a really nice thing set up for him coming off of a screen action, wide open look. And what kills me, Brian, is when he misses, like they don't even look close. None of them were threatening to go in at times against Illinois and even against Oregon. Like they're just really off sometimes.
He's the guy, though, if he could find it and he's capable of it in this last month, these last 9 games, it changes a lot. So we're on a roller coaster journey a little bit with these guys, but that's college basketball for you in a way. And that's why even a week ago, I think we were a little hard on them for good reason, but I'm always hesitant to just say it's over because you never know in hoops. Like I remember the A&M team that Nebraska lost to in the tournament. There was a point late in February where they didn't even think they were going to make it. They had lost 5 in a row, and then they became a really dangerous team all of a sudden in March. They're built differently than Nebraska. Somewhat. They were a bad shooting team for most of the year and then figured it out. So that just goes to show you there are these examples where teams have that 5-game skid and then suddenly they're back on track. And so let's see if they can keep doing it.
Hey, you get 2-0 this week. You're 2/3 of the way to replacing all 6 losses right in a row. Maybe just like Nebraska basketball is a team that just plays in big runs and allows big runs. Maybe that's what their season's going to be. You lose 6, win 6.
Jawan said after they lost 5, he's like, who knows? Maybe we just go win 5 in a row. And it was one of those lines when he said it that gets people make fun of, But I like when competitors have that mindset. And so, yeah, it's possible.
Again, I shouldn't toss this out right as we're trying to leave, but I do think Fred Hoiberg should get a lot more credit for how he's able to steady the ship as he has these last few seasons. When Nebraska has had some of those losses, like the game against Wisconsin, they turn around, they play really hard at home. You beat Illinois, you come out and you beat Oregon. I think he should get far more credit than he does. And I think he's a good coach. I think Nebraska's fortunate to have him. I know that's not an opinion shared by a lot of people, but I think they're fortunate to have him.
He's been really good in February the last 3 years. And This is also not a popular opinion because people say, well, you moved the goalpost for somebody. I do think he completely adjusted sort of how they thought about their roster build and stuff like that in the current climate of college basketball 3 years ago. And so I know everybody, sometimes when things are going bad, I'll get his whole Big Ten record thrown at me for 6 seasons. And I understand it is what it is. But I'll be honest, I don't look at it that way. I think they shifted. There was a line in the sand where they shifted 3 years ago. And in those last 3 seasons from February on, especially, he's had really good teams, sometimes with tough circumstances like 2 years ago where they had all those injuries, and they still were one of the best teams in the league in that month. So February's been a good month for this program the last couple of years, and now I got to see if they can get the trifecta.
Yep. We'll talk all about it next week on Tuesday. Appreciate everybody listening. You catch all the coverage of the games, everything Nebraska basketball related, everything Nebraska related at Husker247.com.